Alright, so our first lesson for the week, 34-1, is about periodic functions. And what a periodic function is, you can see the definition right here. A periodic function is a function that repeats its values in regular intervals called periods. Essentially, a period is like almost like a unit of time in a way. Obviously, like there are periods of history, right? The medieval period and so on, the Renaissance period. So a period in math is essentially the time or the x-axis of repetition. A pattern that repeats at regular intervals is called a periodic function. So you can see it, a good example is right here. You can see this graph has this repetition, and it would obviously continue on if we continued on. But this would be a periodic function. The one right above it, another one. You have this same pattern that gets repeated, and this is going to go on forever. Okay, that's a periodic function. Obviously, not all graphs are like this. We've seen parabolas. This is not a periodic function. It doesn't go like this. It doesn't go in multiple parabolas. This is going to go up forever. This is going to go up forever. So it doesn't actually have a repeating pattern. These periodic functions do. This one right here is not a periodic function because you can tell like from probably like this. Well, these keep getting smaller and smaller. So that curve is obviously pretty large, and then we get a smaller curve, and then a smaller curve, and then eventually this is actually just gonna not really a graph that we can put an equation to, but you can tell that that is very different than the one right above. Right? These are very different from one another. The one on top would be a periodic function because you have that repetition. The one on bottom would not be. Still a function, it's just not a periodic function. Alright, now here's the very important, like three very important vocab terms. A period is the horizontal distance required for the graph of a periodic function to complete one repetition or one cycle. Okay, the biggest key right there, one repetition or one cycle. Repetition or one cycle. So what a period is this right here. Let me actually. This is your period. Alright? Sometimes, most of the time, we start at the axis. So here's the y-axis. So you can see I'm going to start right here. I'm going to go up to a peak, down to a peak, and then back up. And then I end in the middle because that's where I started there. So I'm going to end in the middle. And that would be, this amount would be considered a period. In this case, it would be one, or assuming these are all halves, so half, 1, half, 2. So you can see our period in this case is 2 units, or 2. Alright, that's one cycle. It actually is nice because if you would like, you can also, they have it boxed off like that, but you could actually start at a peak and say, okay, here's my peak, so I'm going to go down and then up, back up to the peak. Alright? Now if I keep going, you're going to go down again, so that's the start of the next cycle. But if you wanted, you could count these. So this starts at 1 half. So you go 1 half, 1, 1 half, 1 and 1 half, 2, 2 and 1 half. This is still 2. Okay, so it doesn't really matter where you start your period, but you're going one cycle. It's probably one of the hardest things to understand, the difference between a cycle and just looking at the graph. What you don't want to do is make this mistake. So you do not want to do this. Oh, I see it goes down and up. There's my period. Okay, that is not your period. This is 1 half of your period. you're going down here, and then on this side you have to go back up. You have to go back up. So this other half is also part of your period there. Okay. Very tricky to to understand the period, but once you see it, it's hard to not see it. So just make sure you're either starting at the midpoint or the middle there, or a peak or a valley, and going to the next peak or valley, right? Whatever one you start with. So it's either, one way you can remember it is peak to peak, or valley to valley. Okay, peak to peak or valley to valley. This would be a peak to peak. Okay, that would be one period. The next word, amplitude. Okay, the amplitude of a function is half the difference between the minimum and maximum values of the range. Very wordy. Let's look at it in the graph. And then this part right here is actually how you find the amplitude. So you can see that middle paragraph is how you find the amplitude. All right, let's look. So the highest that this goes is 6. Probably not good to write there. The highest that this goes is 6. All right. The lowest that it goes, or the valley here, is at 2. We are above our x-axis here, so we have 2. So what I can do is I need to find the difference between the minimum and maximum values of the range. I take absolute value, 6 minus 2, which we know is 4, but then I do 4 divided by 2, and I get 2 as my amplitude. All right. Because you're looking at half would be the divide by 2. The difference we've already done is the absolute value there. So 4 divided by 2 is 2. One thing about the amplitude, it has to be positive. It has to be positive. This is a distance, right? It's the distance, so you have to have a positive distance. You cannot have a negative distance, right? We've talked about that before. That doesn't exist. The last one. So erase this. The midline is a horizontal axis that is used as a reference line about which the graph of the period function isosceles. Again, big words there. Essentially, here's what you do. You're looking for a midline between the peak and the valley. Here's my peak at 6. Here's my valley at 2. Well, what's in the middle of 6 and 2? 4. All right, so this line right here is our midline, all right, because it's exactly in between the two. If you're wondering how to find the midline, find the amplitude first, because the minimum, or the valley, to the midline is 2. The peak to the midline is 2. So our midline is actually just the double of what our amplitude is. In other words, it didn't show up. In other words, it's that 4 that we found when we found the amplitude. Okay, that is your midline. And one other important thing, this is a line, right? Very important. It is a line, so we have to write it as an equation. It's a horizontal line, so we say y equals 4. Okay, that's my midline. Y equals 4, you can see it right there. Okay, you have to write it as an equation. Alright, let's scroll down a little bit. You can actually do this one, it's not too bad. Just go through the questions, draw a rectangle on one repetition. Okay, talking about one repetition here. This would be called, well, actually, these two questions right here helps you find your period. Okay, and then C and D will help you find your amplitude and midline there. Okay, so go ahead and try that one. Try the next page as well, it shouldn't be too bad. Springboard actually does a nice job here of laying it all out, making it simple. So that's why I use the Springboard here. But go ahead and do the next couple problems. Use everything from here. These are big definitions. You do need to know these. It's only going to benefit you if you know these. So please memorize these 3 definitions. Okay, memorize them, please. All right.